Welcome everyone. Today's episode of The Mindful Haven, brought to you by Impireum Psychiatric Group, is deeply meaningful. We're talking about domestic violence, the kind that doesn't just leave bruises, but also scars and changes lives. Our guest today, Nicole Beverly, is a clinical social worker, advocate, and mother, and also a survivor of relentless abuse, stalking, and legal injustice. Her strength and story are not only helping others heal, they're also reaching the big screen. Nicole's life is now being adapted into a feature film, Finding Nicole, a powerful, true story that's helping shine light on an issue that too many still suffer through in silence. I'm joined by my co-host today, Shanti Hubbard, a licensed therapist at Impireum, whose clinical insight and deep compassion bring essential perspective to today's topic. Thank you so much for both being here. And Nicole, thank you specifically for sharing your story and being here today. For those who may be meeting you for the first time, can you tell us a little bit about your life before this abuse began and what your dreams were, your family life? Who was Nicole before the abuse?
Sure. So I grew up in a two-parent household. I would say my parents didn't have the best marriage in terms of communication style, or role modeling, but there was no abuse in the household that I grew up in. I was very outspoken as a child, was told by all of my teachers, well, let's go back to elementary. It was every report card was Nicole talks too much. Nicole's too social. Nicole needs to focus more. And then as I got into high school, most of my teachers were highly encouraging me actually to go into law, because apparently they found me to be very opinionated and not to have a problem sharing, my opinions on different matters. And I've also always been an advocate for others, like as far back as I can remember. Even high school, I remember doing advocacy work on behalf of, I did not grow up in the most diverse area. I grew up in a very small country, white town. And I remember having to speak up a lot on behalf of minority students that were in our school because there was some pretty blatant racism happening. So I've always been, and my parents did raise me to be anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-homophobic, all those things, and speak my voice. So I was someone who would have told you that I could never end up in an abusive relationship and be broken down in the way that I was by my abuser. Probably up until the day I realized that I was broken down by my abuser.
Dealing with an abuser or narcissist, it can really take such a toll on you, and you'll never particularly think it's the situation you're in until unfortunately you're in it. Too many women have experienced that too many times, and sometimes it has to get to a certain point before you realize how bad it truly is. And like you said, being someone who's outspoken, no one would imagine, and you would have never imagined something like that can happen to you. And so many other people who end up in horrible situations like this, unfortunately, feel the same way. So although so many people believe that it would never happen to them, that they'd spot signs early, but abuse doesn't usually begin with violence. There's so many other things that go into it. So what were some of the first red flags that you recognize now in hindsight?
Yeah, so looking back, a lot of them were there, right? But when I met my ex-husband, who was my abuser, and in college. So I was like 19 years old. We met in our sophomore year. He was the captain of the college football team, charismatic. So no one had ever talked to me about what red flags of abuse look like. No one had ever talked to me about what an unhealthy relationship looked like. So I had no clue. But now that I know all those things and I look back, I could see probably the signs started about 6 months in. Some of the controlling behavior, some of the put downs that were at first in a joking manner, but still left a lasting impression. Um, a little bit of the isolation, like talking down about my friends, started to happen about that 6 months point. Looking back, I can see those red flags now for sure were there. And then they just increased over that year to year and a half period.
And they say that when there's mean jokes or taunting jokes, that people mask it by saying, oh, it's just a joke. I was just kidding. And it's supposed to be funny. But there's that saying, there's truth in every joke. So it definitely makes sense that it could be a subliminal form of abuse brewing, which gets masked behind humor, if you will.
Absolutely. Like I refer to it as planting the seeds of doubt of your self-worth, right? Because they're like, oh, I'm just kidding. But in your head, you're like, are they? Like, do I not look good? Am I not smart? They're planting those seeds of doubt, and it's so strategic. It's so strategic the way it happens. And those seeds grow, and they grow into something very ugly when you start to question yourself, and your self-esteem starts to disappear.
Absolutely. It's very, very strategic and very manipulating how those situations can start. Like a seed, as you said, it's small seed, and when things start sprouting and growing, it's this big thing, this big plant that's sprouted that you look back and it's almost, how did we get here? It's
Yeah.
like a very, very sneaky way that abusers start and tackle your mental capacity in a way.
Absolutely.
And dealing with an abuser is certainly not easy. And I know leaving isn't just one moment that happens. It's dozens of little decisions that end up being this bigger decision with this impactful outcome. And it's terrifying. I mean, I have not been through anything that you've been through, fortunately for myself, but it's amazing that you've been brave enough to speak on these issues and make this a movie and do all these things to give yourself this voice. But I've had some experiences, which I think most women have, with some degree of dealing with abuse. And it's terrifying. So can you walk us through that process of leaving? Like, what did it actually take to get out?
Yeah. So my story of leaving, I did everything like I was supposed to, right? Because I started doing research. Once I reached the point, there was an incident that occurred where my ex-husband was incredibly violent. Um, my kids were in the house. He ordered them upstairs. He held a gun to my head. He threatened to kill me, multiple times, told me he was going to kill me with the gun to my head, and took my keys. Abusers, first thing they do, guys, is they take your phone, they take your keys, so you have no way to leave, you have no way to get a hold of the outside world for help. He did that, and he called me off work because I had so many bruises at that point. And he called me off work for 3 days, and I still didn't leave right away because I was terrified. And in the beginning, when incidents would happen with the really bad emotional abuse and the physical abuse, there were apologies, and I'm so sorry, and I'm going to go to counseling, and I'm going to stop drinking, and I'm going to change. And I wanted the relationship to work. I had 2 kids with this man, and I really wanted to be a family. And he would use that against me too. You, as a single mom, can't raise 2 boys. You can't do it on your own. And he always planted those seeds of doubt in me too. But after that moment, and it was no longer, I'm sorry. The next morning it was, if you don't apologize to me for, for what you almost made me kill you last night, then it's going to happen again. And he started to get off on threats, off on the power and control, and there were no more apologies. And it became so dark. And I was so fearful that I found myself laying in bed thinking, how do I get to the gun before him next time? And I had to really question myself and say, Nicole, like, it doesn't matter who gets there first because your kids are going to be without a parent, or maybe both parents, either way, because someone's going to be dead and someone's going to be incarcerated. Um, so I made the decision. It took me, probably about 5 months to tell anyone, what had happened with that, especially the very severe, incident where I was like, he's going to kill you or you have to leave. But during that time, I started doing research and I created a safety plan, and I read that you should take a few things out of the house at a time. You should make copies of your most important documents, because once you leave, the chance that you'll ever get a chance to see those things again is very low. I was told if there were pictures, photographs, anything that was extremely meaningful to me, take it when I left, because I would probably never see it again. But I had to do it in a very strategic way. So like when he would go to work, I'd make copies of what I needed and try to make his office look like it was untouched. I took things out with me, when he wasn't home, and stored it at my mom's house. So like I had a plan, we had a safety plan. I filed for a personal protection order. He was served. My kids and I left to go to my sister's in Canada for a week. I had to inform my work. All this by the book, right? Like everything that everyone tells you to do. And when, I had to come back, I was a social worker, so I had to come back for my job. And that's when the stalking really started. And I called the police multiple times. So even though I did everything correctly, I had that personal protection order in place. It didn't prevent him from terrorizing me even after I left. And as you guys know, the most dangerous time for victims is when you leave, because your abuser loses power and control over you. So it was a very terrifying time.
Which, Nicole, I'm glad you said that, because I, as a also domestic violence survivor and a therapist who's mostly done work with people who are victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, I have done presentations, and as of 2021, it is 75% more likely to die, a person is, if they leave the relationship. So that terrifying statistic makes you question, why do people still ask, why didn't they leave?
Absolutely.
So with you taking that step, with you making those safety plans, and like I tell my clients, safety plans are not just physical, it's emotional. What emotional safety plans did you put into place?
Yeah. So in having children too, that had been exposed to the abuse, and not knowing, even as, I'm at this point, you guys, I have my master's degree in social work, and I'm still like, what do I do? How do I make sure my kids don't become victims or perpetrators? Did I stay too long? I did, once we left, as soon as I could, get them and myself into counseling. They went into group and individual counseling. They were, when I left, they were, 6 and 10. So they were still very young. But it was very confusing for them, because although they were aware of the abuse, they were aware that we had a personal protection order, we still had court ordered custody exchanges, and he still had visitation. So I was still forced to do drop offs and pickups with him. The court decided, and I'm sure you guys have heard this from other victims, that McDonald's was a really safe place, apparently, to do custody exchanges, which is insane. And we had an incident there where he actually tried dragging me out of my vehicle. No one tried to stop. No one tried to intervene. No one asked me if I needed help. He took off before the police got there. And it was just yet another violation of the protection order. But my kids are seeing all of this, and I went to court repeatedly to try to stop visitation because of things just like this. So even though I was trying to do the healing work for them, they're still, for 2.5 years, were exposed to this back and forth toxic and abusive behavior during the shared custody. And I wish judges, would become a lot more educated on those things and how much harm it's doing, not only to victims, but to the children.
Absolutely. How hard was it for you to find a therapist that is trauma informed? Because I am a TFCBT, so trauma informed cognitive behavioral therapists at Impireum, but I know not all therapists are trauma informed. I've had many clients come that have heard many things from therapists that have never been exposed to domestic violence or any form of trauma. So the things they're telling their clients aren't always helpful to their specific situation. So how hard was it to find a trauma-informed therapist for you and the kid?
It is difficult. And I've heard horror stories from other victims that I've worked with about therapists who've caused more damage because they aren't informed on trauma, or even more specifically on domestic violence, interpersonal violence, and the questions they ask or the way they react to disclosures is damaging to the victim. And so finding someone, I'm also a trauma-informed therapist, finding someone who has that background is really important. And I know state to state, it probably varies on how many people are, but finding someone that you're safe and comfortable with is crucial to making progress, and growing in therapy for sure. And I had a therapist who was not that for me at one point, and I just chose to stop seeing that therapist and find another therapist that was better suited for me, because I just felt like I was not getting anywhere and they weren't hearing me or understanding.
But I'm sure having the training, you knew what things to look out for. And unfortunately, when you have to be your own advocate, you're not always able to. Some people look, because you've been in a position where where power has been exerted upon you and your control has been taken away, people still look at multiple forms of authority that way. So they're like, well, they're the expert, so maybe they should know. Maybe I should think like this.
Absolutely.
You being able to do that is great, that you were able to say, this isn't working for me, so let me find somebody else. And we do
and
need
also
more
insurance restrictions too, right? Some people don't have a choice. They just, it's like whatever number, whoever your insurance company refers you to, that's your choice, unfortunately.
Absolutely. Most of my career was actually at domestic violence agencies, and thankfully they don't have to take insurance. And that was a great thing that I loved about being there. It didn't matter what insurance you took, didn't have to ask for any money. And a lot of people don't know what services are offered through those agencies. And I know you've mentioned before, like in your book, I read that there's not that many beds and shelters, but people only know about that part of the shelter. They don't know about all the other resources that are offered.
And I don't know about in other states, but here in Michigan, even those other services are very limited, and there's long wait lists, which is just really unfortunate, because not only is there not a place for victims to stay, there's also a lack of help and resources for so many other pieces and things that they need to recover and rebuild their lives.
Absolutely. Would you say that there was maybe a key phrase that you told yourself when things got really, really hard?
So I learned a few strategies. Both to basically combat overthinking, because when you're in trauma and you're living in trauma, you're constantly like, you already have 1,000 things on your mind that are like real danger. And then you have all these other things. I've got to do this. I'm a single parent. How am I going to take care of all of this? And so 2 strategies that I learned, one was putting things on a shelf. And if I was starting to experience a lot of anxiety because of my overthinking, I would ask myself, Nicole, is there anything you can do about this right this second? If you cannot, you have to put it on a shelf and come back to it later. Otherwise, you're going to drive yourself absolutely insane. So that became like, I really started to work on that. And then when I had a calm moment, I would try to come back to it. And guess what? Sometimes it didn't even matter anymore, right? Because I was just in that overthinking stage. And so it was something that it didn't even matter that much. But at that moment, I was overthinking and stressing myself out so much. The other thing that I did was use, I don't know if you guys have done this in therapy before, a stop sign technique. And I paired it with a rubber band on my wrist. But with overthinking about self-doubt, criticism, because that emotional abuse, those words stay in your head for a very long time. And I would hear his words start to come up when I was struggling. And if I started to hear them, I would imagine a stop sign. I would even sometimes verbalize the word stop or say it in my head, snap that rubber band, and automatically replace it with a positive thought. You're going to be okay. You're going to get through. You're not stupid. You're not dumb, whatever I had to replace that thought with. And so those were the two techniques I would say I used a lot for the overthinking, and then those intrusive thoughts from the emotional abuse that weren't just going to go away by themselves.
Imperium, I'm really big on telling my clients, you don't have to believe everything you think. Behavior is learned. What we know about ourselves, we weren't born with these thoughts, positive or negative. So a lot of it comes from other people. Well, all of it comes from other people. So when you're having those negative thoughts, thinking about, is this my voice or is it someone else's voice that's now become my voice because it's happened so much?
Absolutely.
And like I said before, emotional safety is super important, but we can't heal unless we're physically and emotionally safe. And people who have been in domestic violence situations will sort of wrap their minds around, okay, I'm physically safe at this moment, but they don't know why they can't think better or have better relationships. It's like, well, that emotional safety part is in there too, and it's not always being taken care of. What do you think is your best way that you've used your experiences to support others?
Yeah. So one of the things that victims often don't like when I tell them this, is don't date. Don't date after you leave an abusive relationship. I recommend for a year. And while you are doing deep work on yourself, to love yourself, because until you're at that point, you are so likely to end up in another abusive relationship. And I see it time and time again with survivors. They jump in and they're like, oh, this person's better. And I'm just holding my breath and I'm thinking, the mask, the abusers, manipulators, they wear this mask. And of course they seem like the most amazing person you've ever met. And they only want to be with you and they love you and they love bomb you. And so I'm seeing this happen and I'm saying, be careful, take your time, do you love yourself first, put in the work. And then usually within 3 to 6 months, they come back and say, you were right. Are abusive, but maybe they were abusive in a different way. And maybe they weren't physically abusive, but they were emotionally abusive. But until we really truly love ourselves and know our own worth and know what our, I call them our must-haves and deal breakers are for dating relationships, and are able to stand firm behind those, you're still at risk for getting re-involved with an abusive individual. So once you do that self-work, it's not easy. It's not easy. It's pushing yourself. It's doing therapy. It's trying new strategies that people recommend to you, going online, trying new strategies for coping and figuring out what works for you. Because what works for me might not work for you or you. It's going to be different strategies. But I've come to the point where I finally, do love myself enough that I know I will never settle for anyone who treats me less than I deserve. But it took me time to get here. It was not easy. It took a lot of work.
It does take a lot of time. I'm a big statistic person, so biggest group of people at risk is 18 to 24.
Yeah.
Or getting into a domestic violence relationship. What are a couple of healthy versus unhealthy traits for relationships would you say that you would tell that group?
Yeah. So, part of the work that I do is actually going into high schools and teaching dating violence, red flags and green flags. And I always start the conversation, which is still amazing to me because I've probably been in 16 high schools now. And I always say, anyone who's ever had a conversation with an adult about dating violence, raise your hand. And there'll be one kid. I'll be like, not just teachers, your family friends. Nobody's raising their hand because conversations are not being had. So once I really get into it, they know my story ahead of time. And then I tell them all the red flags that I missed and stories of other survivors and the red flags that they missed and the outcome. But teaching them that the love bombing which seems so like, it seems like such a good thing. Like, why would that be bad if someone is saying all these amazing things to you right off the bat? But like, no one can know they love you in a week. Like, let's just be real. Like, you cannot know that you love someone in a week, and you cannot believe someone to be authentic if they're telling you that. Isolating you from your friends and family, huge red flag. They don't want you spending time with your friends. They only want you doing things with them. They're isolating you in a strategic way so that you don't tell people what's going to be happening in your relationship. And also, so if you do need help, you feel less safe going to them for help. Anger, and not just towards the victim, but I always say anger towards others out in the community. Pay attention. If you're at a restaurant and they get upset with the waiter, are they overreacting? If someone bumps into them, are they overreacting? Is that level of anger just present on a regular basis? The controlling behavior when it starts getting into what you can wear, what you can do, what looks good on you, what looks bad on you, who you can spend time with, all red flags. And so when we really flip that and look at the green flags, we're looking at someone who loves you, cares about you for you. They're not going to tell you what you can wear, what you can do, who you can be friends with. They're going to accept, embrace you for who you are and all of the individual things about you that make you you. So, trying to flip that and help them understand. And every time I do this, I have so many students contacting me after or waiting in line after to say, I had no idea. I'm already in an abusive relationship. And we know statistics tell us 1 in 3 high school students is already in an abusive relationship or has experienced 1 in 3, but we're not talking about it with them. We're not teaching them. We're not doing the prevention piece, which makes no sense whatsoever. But most recently, I've had young men wait to talk to me after and say, Miss Beverly, I am recognizing that I am doing the red flags. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be this way. What do I do? How do I get help now? And I'm like, this is huge, right? Like, this is huge that, like, for them to admit it and want help. So we do have young people who want the help. We just have to start working on prevention. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but we're not going to change stats. Nothing is going to change. In fact, like you mentioned, it's getting worse. Domestic violence rates are worse. Homicide rates are worse. Family side rates are worse. It's every year it grows, but we're not doing anything to combat that through prevention, which is just mind blowing to me, because anything else, any other epidemic, we're using prevention strategies.
Absolutely. In my experience, because we have gone into different schools and we try to go into even middle schools because kids are dating in middle school, whether or not parents like it or not, like they are dating. Have you had trouble getting into different schools?
There have been a few schools that I've had to have some tough conversations with, because they were like, I don't know what they were worried about, quite honestly, but they were like, we don't talk about that in our school. Like, it was a dirty subject. And so I asked for a meeting with the principals. It was a high school, a main principal and the 2 assistant principals. And I said to them, quite frankly, I said, this is undoubtedly happening in your school right now. The statistics prove to us 1 in 3 students is already impacted. Girls in abusive relationships are 90% likely to stay with their abuser because they don't know what to do. So it's happening. Talking about it isn't going to make it happen. So you have a choice of educating these kids and helping them avoid these relationships or pretending like it doesn't exist and letting it grow and manifest itself. And they made the choice to let me in the doors, and have those conversations with the kids, because I was very frank and honest with them because it wasn't making sense to me. And also letting them know that when we continue to not talk about things or act like these are dirty topics, we're continuing to perpetuate the way society looks at domestic violence as it's not that important. It doesn't matter that much. It's a family issue. It's not a community issue. It's not, something anyone gets involved with. And we have to change that. We have to, or again, we're going to get nowhere.
Absolutely. Domestic violence thrives in silence. It does.
Exactly.
And it's sad that we still have those questions of why didn't they leave or why didn't they know? And then if you are a person who has higher, like, graduate level of education or a higher career, whatever people consider higher, well, how did you let yourself get into that? And we have to recognize people are people and anyone can be manipulated, anyone can be harmed, and give people more grace, give more resources.
Absolutely. I feel like, and hearing you say that, it reminds me, like, I think people have like this image in their mind of what a victim looks like.
They do. And if you don't have it, especially with police, if you don't look like a victim, then they're not going to treat you as such.
Yeah. And some of the strongest, most educated, financially secure, beautiful women that I know are survivors of domestic violence. Like, it does not discriminate. It does not discriminate. And getting people to understand that can be difficult. But I feel like the more we talk about it and have these conversations like we are right now, the more we can help combat those myths, because that's exactly what they are. They're myths. It can happen to anyone, and it does. It happens to anyone.
Absolutely. When you speak about the different areas in your life that you've advocated, like you push very hard, you make sure you are a voice for other people. What role can other places like Imperium and other places in the community play in trying to push for that advocacy?
Yeah, I think one of the things like we've done here in Michigan is really look at legislation and how it's impacting victims. So we were finally able, it's in legislative work is really difficult. We know this, right? But having lobbyists involved helps. But we were finally able to get the address confidentiality bill passed. I had to testify in front of Senate 3 times.
You didn't have it in Michigan?
We did not have it in Michigan. We just got it
one
a
of
year and
the
a half
people who
ago.
did it in Oklahoma for my agency. I was the one licensed in Southwest Oklahoma. That is sad.
We did not have it. We do not have relocation funding for victims. Our PPO legislation has not been updated since 1958. So we're looking at that right now and how outdated and detrimental that is for victims at this point in time. So I think it's looking at like, how can we look at legislation and advocate and talk to, educate representatives, judges, but also maybe having empowerment events for victims. That's something that's huge. I do retreats and outings and events where victims come together, and it's the only time for many of them that they've ever felt heard, because you're finally with other people who've been through it. And it's so different when you can relate to someone on that level and be like, oh my gosh, you too. And you feel like, okay, it's not just me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't just weak. Like, it happened to all these people. And that for me was, as a victim turning into a survivor, the most empowering thing for me was attending retreats and also connecting with other survivors, even online, in online groups, on pages related to domestic violence. Some of my closest friends are people I met online who live in different states, but we see each other at least twice a year. But we just connected because it's so different when it's like finding your tribe of people who understand, because people try to understand, but unless you've really lived through it, it's very difficult.
It is. My favorite part about doing groups with survivors is that look in each other's eyes when they're like, you get it. You've been through that too. Like, it's not just me.
Right.
And one of my favorite quotes that I've heard is, first we're the victim, then we're the survivor, and then we become the teacher. And we need teachers. But I try to tell my clients, everybody doesn't have to be the super big advocate that goes to all the different places. You talk to one person, you're a teacher.
Absolutely.
You change your kids' thoughts. You've been a teacher.
And I'll tell you guys, it took me to, even after like the stalking and he was finally incarcerated for the first time, it took me a long time to start speaking publicly about what happened to me, because I needed that healing work first, right? And then it kind of organically just happened that I started, like, things were so crazy with the stalking, and we didn't even get into the attempts to hire yet. My ex-husband actually tried to attempt to hire multiple people to kill me from prison. Law enforcement was not taking me seriously, so I had to go to social media and expose the system and the failures to try to get justice for myself and my children and to stay alive. So my voice, I had to start using it in order to be taken seriously and to be heard and for someone to finally do something. Had I not done that, I wouldn't I'd either be dead, or I wouldn't be here in Michigan. I'd be living somewhere else with a different name and social security number because I would have had to change my identity and go into hiding. So it took me a while to become comfortable with using my voice, but then I had to use my voice because it was the only way to protect myself and my family because the legal system was not protecting me.
Would you agree that fear and shame are probably the top two why people aren't able to speak out?
Fear and shame are huge. And in the beginning for me, absolutely, and guilt. I carried so much guilt, and I still carry guilt for my kids that I stayed and that I chose that relationship. I still, have to work on that within myself, the guilt that I carry about that.
Seeing a
And I think
therapist
that's
in me
very,
wants to talk to you about that because I'm like, you didn't choose, you were forced
yeah,
choice.
yeah. And it's just something that like and I always tell victims because they like think like there's some magic day where you're healed, right? And I always say, I wish that were true, but I mean, you're going to get better. You're going to get stronger. You're going to feel better. But you're going to have moments where those lingering thoughts are going to come back, or you're going to question something you did or didn't do. And you're going to have to fight and push through that again because trauma isn't it's not like a linear healing process, right? It's like this. So I always tell people, it's not going to be like just miraculously one day, but you will get better and you will get stronger, but you're still going to have moments.
Absolutely. You're so incredibly brave to have went through that and chose the route to speak out, even starting with speaking out on social media and building that community and finding that community is very, very inspiring for anyone who has been in situations like that. It's the only real community that would understand. It's so hard to understand that situation of abuse if you haven't been through it. So you're so incredibly brave and powerful to have taken your experience and build something so powerful and encouraging from it. And now you're turning your story into a feature film. That's such a huge platform. It's going to reach so many people and help so many people. But what do you hope that people can walk away with after watching Finding Nicole?
Yeah. And just so you guys know, it is out. I don't know if you know, it is on
Yes.
streaming already. Okay. I just will put that plug out there right now. It is streaming on Prime. It is on Apple TV, Direct TV, Xfinity, Xbox, Sling, Fandango. You can also get the DVD on Amazon. And for those who don't know, because we haven't talked about that yet, I also wrote a book, Finding Nicole, by the same title, that the movie is kind of based on. But my book goes much more in depth into the darkest parts of my story. I actually have police reports in my book too, just because things were so outlandish that I didn't ever want someone to be like, oh, she's making this up. This can't be true. So I actually put police report numbers and pieces of police reports in my book so that if anyone ever questioned, they could do a FOIA request for them. But the back section of my book it's a guidebook for overcoming abuse and also tips for how to document when you're going through it. Like, what's the most important information? I learned very quickly if I called 911, I kept a notebook with me and it was the date, the time, were there witnesses? What happened? Who were the officers who responded? I would try to get their badge numbers because when you're in the trauma, you're not going to remember any of those details. So I had to learn, unfortunately, a lot of times victims, we become our own attorneys, our own police officers, our own detectives, our own, we're having to do it all. So I learned and I had that book with me everywhere with my PPOs in it. But I talk about that in the book about how to document and then also how to prepare for court. Because, if you go into court too strong, you must be lying because you're not impacted by the abuse. If you go into court crying too much, you're hysterical and you're crazy, right? So it's like this fine line of how to prepare yourself mentally for going to court and testifying. So in this book, I put everything I wished someone had told me, and that I wished I had with me, going through the process. So, I just wanted to put that out there because I didn't know if you guys were aware of the book too. And some law professors are now making it required reading. Here in Michigan, shelters and counseling agencies are giving it out to victims, as are some prosecutors, when they're working with victims, just to give them someone they can relate to who's gone through it. And I'm very, very vulnerable. This was very difficult to write. I talked about moments of wanting to kill myself because the abuse was so bad or the system was letting me down so badly, and how I pulled myself out of those very dark moments. So, and then of course the guidebook. But then I connected with a producer, who was aware of the episode of Inside Evil with Chris Como. They followed me through the court process, for 8 months. I made the crazy decision to, sure, let's do this because I want the world to see what victims go through. But it was a lot being mic'd up in court and everywhere, but I don't regret it now because it really did show the world how hard it is for victims. But, I have a attorney friend that knew him and he connected me with the producer and they're like, what do you think about turning this into a movie? And so we sat down, and the producer grew up as a childhood victim of domestic violence. He grew up in a household where it occurred. Our screenwriter, Jeffrey Calhoun, grew up in a household where it occurred. So the stars kind of aligned. The hardest part was making it an hour and a half long. It should have been a series in order to incorporate everything. So I hope we did the best we could because we wanted this to be a real story. We didn't want the fairy tale version, like a lot of these movies out here where the victim just calls and they meet a hot detective and they are whisked off into fairyland, right? We're like, no, they need to see both sides. They need to see what's happening behind closed doors, and then they need to see what happens when the police come and the abuser manipulates the police into believing the abuser and not the victim. And so I think from the reviews that we've gotten from survivors and victims that we did a good job with that, and really showing both sides, of what it looks like. And people, I think, are shocked because they don't realize how manipulative abusers can be. And Shamari Giles, who plays my ex-husband in the movie, did a phenomenal job of showing that Jekyll Hyde and how he could be so charming in 1 minute and so dark in the next minute. So, the goal is to spread awareness, help people understand that it's never as easy as just leaving, showing how you can get sucked in to these relationships and then the controlling patterns, but also the letdown of the legal system. And not just with the police, but also with the court system and different things that I had to endure. So if nothing else, I hope that it gives victims hope and that it educates people who have maybe never experienced it so they have a different perspective and they'll be more willing to help and take a stand when they see domestic violence happening or know of a victim who needs help.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nicole, for not only your courage that's so inspiring, but also spreading this awareness and being an educator for those that don't understand. I think that that's such a crucial part, and it's super enlightening to hear because I think that that is something that is significantly lacking just in the world. I think going back to what you said earlier, finding community when you've been in such a dark place or going through such a dark place and such a traumatic experience, that's something that's so important, but also the educational piece to people that can't understand it is, I think, just genius to even think about from that perspective, especially being a survivor, also taking that and finding a way to not only spread awareness about your story, but to educate others is, I'm blown away. I think that that is so, so important. So thank you for all of that. And thank you for, again, having the courage to share your story and be such a important piece of people's lives that are struggling. You're changing so many lives by not only your movie that's out, but also the book. And I think that the back of the book with kind of that mentorship aspect is also so important. I personally haven't heard of something like that. So you're just doing so much. And I thank you. And I'm sure everyone listening who has potentially been in situations like this are really, really thankful as well. It's your courage is not just inspiring. I think it's world changing. And at Impireum Psychiatric Group, we believe that healing is possible when people are met with care, compassion, and community. And you've given that to so many just by showing up today. So to anyone listening who may be living in silence, you're not alone and you deserve safety, support, and peace. And we will definitely link some of the resources in the show notes, and there will be some follow-up there for anyone who wants to have some more resources on this topic. And thank you both so much for joining me. This has been the Mindful Haven, your safe space for holistic mental health conversations. See you next time.